Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friends, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Good morning. This is Zach in Washington, D.C. Today we are discussing making a career decision. Let's take a walk in the woods, limited runs, Broadway rock and roll shows, and am I missing some important design skills? All on Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Welcome, everyone, to episode 220, 2020. Actually, it's 220, so there we are.
And we're over halfway to our goal of 8 award-winning seasons.
And we're over halfway to our goal of 500,000 downloads.
Wow.
Oh, that's good.
Right.
That's good. That's better.
That's the best award there is.
We already have 250,000. Now we're going for the 500,000. I don't know what we get if we got 500,000 downloads. I was actually doing some research on that. I don't think we get anything, which is a drag. But hey, so last week our prodigal brother Stan returned to the show. And, obviously it was great to have him back after like 7 or 8 weeks that he was gone. But you know something? I think Zach and I fear that he may have journeyed into the dark side of being an esoteric audiophile. What do you think, Zach? You think that's happening to Stan?
I mean, I was starting to wonder as I followed his audiophile adventures on Facebook if his Stanbatical was actually just him being trapped in a room surrounded by all these like weird, architecturally awkward ribbon speakers and power amplifiers. I mean, I like good sound as much as the next guy. But what he's got going on there is like a showroom.
It's some crazy shit going on in Stan's living room, let me tell you. He's got these big magnaplaners. I don't know if anyone knows what those are, but they're these big ribbon speakers that are about 8 feet tall and subwoofers everywhere. And now he's got like some new amplifiers that are called shits. And I'm not kidding you, that's what it's called. And they're super high-end amplifiers. They're like ridiculously expensive, and they don't even have an on-off switch in the front of them. So, I mean, that's a whole another situation. But yeah, so Stan has caught the audio bug from me, and I think that he is like gotten off the deep end, but we'll see what happens.
Right. I mean, I'd be curious to see what his electric bill is now.
Yeah. Well, in Florida, you never know. They're not solar powered, that's for sure.
Are you sure he's not mining for Bitcoin down there? Are you sure that's not what he's doing?
He's got some Bitcoins. I thought he was doing the Dogecoin. I think he gave up on that. Speaking of Dogecoin, did you see Elon Musk on Saturday Night Live a few weeks ago? It was pretty damn funny.
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty good. The Dogecoin, he basically admitted was a big scam. But that's Elon. He will always say something wacky that will send the markets in turmoil. Well, enough of that. Let's get on to some lighting. So Steve has our first listener question.
And it's from Sam in California. And Sam writes, what skills are missing in graduating lighting designers? Well, I mean, there could be 2 categories here. There could be undergraduates who are graduating and going right into the profession, and there could be graduate students. So I think for me, because I only deal with graduate students, I can kind of address maybe some skills that I see undergraduates don't have as they enter graduate school. And I have a list here of like 37. But I think
I'm going to get a drink. I'll see you guys in about 10 minutes.
Go ahead. I think I'll take one, and the one that I think is the biggest thing that undergraduates are missing would be communication skills, and the ability to actually talk and express an idea. I mean, it's hard, and to have a conversation with a director. And in all fairness, because they're undergraduates, they're probably having to have a conversation with a teacher, and that's a whole different can of worms when you're a young design student and your teacher is the director. But it seems to me communication is a big thing there, and probably misunderstanding what the director is saying. What he or she says is not necessarily what they hear. What do you guys think?
It's interesting. I what you were just talking about kind of made me think a little bit about the program that Wendell Harrington has at Yale, where she actually goes out of her way to bring stage managers and directors into the projection design class because she wants them to get a taste of the language that the projection designers are learning and a little bit of knowledge about their workflow and how those things operate. Because I think in some ways it's a two-way street. It's not just teaching someone how to talk to a director, but it's also teaching a director how to talk to a designer. The thing that I have found a lot is, at least especially in undergrad, is there's sort of a gap in the discussion about budgets because you're sort of, in the undergrad world, you're really protected from worrying about how much is this going to cost in a way that when you get out of school, all of a sudden, how much is this going to cost, and how much do people get paid and things like that. Those are business skills that you may not get right away.
Going along with that, the flip side is true also. I see lighting plots at URTA, and they're kind of skimpy. It doesn't mean they're not a good plot, but they're kind of light. And I'll ask someone about that, and they'll say, oh, that's what the TD said I could use.
Right.
So, so all of a sudden they're artificially limited by the environment they're in.
Well,
David?
that limitation can actually work, can help, because they have to make then some decisions. And making those decisions is part of what we do in the profession. Because we're constantly limited by time and money. I think Steve Shelley in his book talks about that, about limitations. Mm-hmm. And it really is a very smart thing to consider, because one of the first things I do is I ask, okay, how much time do I have to focus? How much time do I have to cue? How much money do I have? And also finding out whether the set will be a full stage rake. Can I actually put a ladder on it? So therefore, if it's a full stage rake and I have to use focus tracks, if I'm using conventional fixtures, then that's like doubled my focus time. So, a lot of things you have to consider there. And I don't know if it's really a bad thing to limit students to be able to have them make that decision and then say, and it's like queuing. When I get a student and I say, okay, I want to look at your cue list the week before you go into the theater, and there'll be 400 cues on the list. And I say, something, you only have 8 hours on Saturday to do this. I could not write 400 cues in 8 hours. And I've been doing it a lot longer than you have. So I would suggest really paring this down, for Head of Gabler or something like that. I was like, right. No, this Head of the Musical? I have no idea. Getting back to the question, though, for the past couple of weeks, they've had all these interviews, graduating grad students on these different events. And I interviewed just about every single lighting designer. And quite a few stage designers, set designers as well. And I must say I'm kind of surprised at the lack of breadth of experience in different type of controllers and also different types of CAD programs. I mean, very few of them have AutoCAD experience. And especially for lighting designers, AutoCAD's really important because it could pay your bills. You could get a job in an architectural firm if you know AutoCAD and Revit. So why not?
Oh, totally. I mean, although in the scenic design world, I often tell people once you start learning AutoCAD and then you learn Maya, you go work on TV commercials and you'll never come back to theater.
That's true. And some people go into lighting, into architectural lighting, they never come back to the theater. But the great thing about architecture, working in an architectural world, is that your day usually ends at 5 o'clock, which means that you can then go to the theater and, even a small community theater or whatever, and still get your yayas out doing Hedda Gabler, the musical, right? So why not? And you're paying your bills, and a lot of architectural stuff is really super interesting. Plus, you could work for larger, special event firms, like a firm who Zak works with, and one of his firm. I'm sure that you love people coming in with those types of skills, Zak, don't you?
Oh, totally. Well, I mean, the way that I approach any project, is that we're telling a story. And so having that background in theater where you're literally telling a story, I think is key. If we're just sort of lighting up a car-to-car show, there can still be a story that's told there. And so it's a combination of, you understand the way that color and movement and shape can impact a story, and also having that background in the theater of what you were saying earlier of knowing, I only have 8 hours. I have these 400 cue ideas. How can I make this look like 400 cues, but actually achieve it in 8 hours? And I think that part of that one of the skills that really goes with that is like learning not just how to ask questions, but learning what questions to ask. Because I think at this point now, like the three of us in our career, when we start a project, we already know there's like a list of 20 questions in our head that we need to get answered right away in order to get started. And I think that for younger people, they don't always know that. Sometimes they're a little timid about asking that. And like we also know like who to ask, who's the right person to ask, what stuff is going to be provided in documentation, so we shouldn't waste someone's time asking that, things like that. And some of that really you're only going to get with experience anyway.
Well, some of that is talking to the master electrician also. Right. I mean, I was chatting with someone and they had a decent inventory. And on that inventory, they had 60 Colortran 20, 30, 40s. And if you just read the piece of paper, I mean, you think, okay, well, they're fine. But I thought, I'll ask the question. I said, what kind of shape are these in? And the electrician said, well, I wouldn't use them. Well, you need to take them off the inventory if you wouldn't use them. And he goes, oh, yeah, they're fine for backing stuff in hallways.
Oh, God. I have also found an incredible lack of professional experience coming out of these schools. Now, you're saying, well, of course they're not going to have professional experience. They're in college. They're in universities. They're learning everything there. Well, the good universities, the really good ones, will find ways of developing internships and mentorships that link these students to the profession so that they have experienced what it's like to work with union crews, and also how professional designers deal with crises and things like that, and understand how professional stage managers work.
I found early in my career on Broadway that in the lighting world, there was two kinds of paperwork. There was NYU style paperwork, and there was SUNY Purchase style paperwork. And that you found that a lot of the Purchase lighting designers sought out Purchase students because they knew how to do the kind of paperwork that they understood. And I even know a story of a Purchase lighting designer hiring an NYU lighting designer as his associate and being completely lost in the paperwork. And I saw the paperwork and it was very thorough, but it was like a different style. So like, how much of that is influenced by the teacher or the professor, and how much of that is like a universal thing? I'm just curious.
Let me turn that around, and let me say that as you well know, there is an NYU style of doing something, and there's a Yale style of doing something. So if you go to the showcase, the NYU designers are very recognizable. And the Yale designers are very recognizable in how they produce paperwork. The question is, can you tell the difference after they've been out 3 or 4 years? Because all of a sudden, they're simply producing the paperwork that's expected on Broadway.
Right.
And they're really, it's hard to put a finger on where they came from.
Yeah, I think it's gotten, especially now that, even in my short 2-decade career, the technology has advanced to the point where I think there's so much more information and data that could be collected electronically and all this other stuff that things have equalized a bit. But I definitely remember early on where people were just like, I can't read this.
Well, I think a student, and actually a young assistant, or any assistant for that matter, needs to be able to deal with any type of paperwork that the designer wants to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, that's where in the projections world, we're like 30 years behind you guys in paperwork. So everybody has their own weird paperwork and different apps that they make their paperwork with because we still haven't standardized.
You guys need an Ann McMills of projections. That's what you need.
That would be nice. So Jessica in Georgia asks, hey, Zach, what was the show that made you pursue a career in theatrical design?
Oh, Calcutta. No, that's not it? I thought it would be.
No, but it did happen around the same time that Oh, Calcutta was on Broadway. So it's funny because a lot of times I talk about this quote unquote light bulb moment where I had the notion that I could fuse all of my interests in music and computers and theater and design into one thing when I saw the Rocky Horror Show on Broadway, which had video that was done by Batwood and Robin. And shortly after that, I approached them and I started working for them. But in reality, when I was in first grade, I was in a production of Camelot and I played the Herald. And I had one line, which was, "The Queen is at the stake, Your Highness. Shall I signal the torch?" And in that moment, I realized like being in live entertainment is something that I want to do. And my father was a scenic designer, and so sort of as a gag, we had our own little fake company we called Better Than Life Ideas, and we kind of, I made like special effects for theater as like just a hobby, starting all the way back then. So, and I kind of ran away from the theater to be a musician, and then came back full circle when I saw, Rocky Horror Show. But for me, it was that being in Camelot when I was in first grade. So what about you guys?
Well, in first grade, I wasn't even interested in anything in the theater. And matter of fact, I wasn't really interested in the theater until I was a freshman in college, because I was a music major and I was doing, bars and stuff, basically playing in clubs. But I went to see, back in 1970, I think it was, an Alice Cooper concert. And I had seen a lot of rock bands. I'd go every week. There'd be a rock band playing at Pirates World or the Sportatorium, or, these are venues, big venues in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. World. And it was really cool. Pirates World was fantastic because it was a big amusement park. And for $4, you get to spend the entire day at the park. Yeah. Then see Led Zeppelin at night. It was awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah, and back then, it was just a bunch of park hands, and all that. But Alice Cooper had a light show. He actually was the first live act that I saw with a really legitimate light show. Plus, his shows started and still continue to this day being extremely theatrical. So that's when I saw the integration of theater, lights, and music. And I think it was those early rock concerts. And then I went and I was actually cast in a show. It was a William Saroyan show called The Time of Your Life that I did the music for. I scored. I composed that show, and I played, of course, Wesley, the piano player. And I was on stage. Do you believe that? And I had lines. Nice. So like your Camelot story, I actually had some lines, And I also get beaten up in the show, too. It was great. So I got beaten up off stage, and I got to go, ow, ow. What can I tell you? Steve?
I think I was in the 5th or 6th grade, and I got bussed to see Androcles and the Lion in an arena theater. And I just thought that was the most amazing thing in the world, that these people were doing this show and they were surrounded and it was dark, and I thought the lights were really interesting. It just, the whole experience made me kind of curious about the theater. And I came back on my own with my parents, of course, maybe a month later, and same theater, and saw Macbeth there. And by then I was really hooked on it. Went out and bought myself a copy of Shakespeare.
Nice.
That's cool. That's really cool. So William in British Columbia asks, have you gone back to nature for exercise during the pandemic? Should that lifestyle be continued in the theater? Well, William, going back to nature, I think you're asking me that question because I live in California and you think we're a bunch of tree huggers and I just hang out, and talk to trees and the sky and the wind and the bees. But, I got really crazy during the pandemic, and I'm sure I'm not speaking for myself. I'm sure I'm speaking to about 90% of you out there, because all of a sudden I stayed home. I had to stay home. I wasn't traveling. I'm out of the country the majority of the year, and I'm used to traveling, and I love traveling, and that all stopped. So I started to get crazy, and I started to gain weight, and I decided that, hey, I live like 3 houses from the beach. I've got this incredible bike trail, and I have a bike that's like sitting in my house. Let me get my butt on that bike. And I did. And I started to do that in the morning, every day. I could do an 8-mile ride down to the Queen Mary and back. And it was great. It was really terrific because you go out, you get the air, and now it's part of my lifestyle. I do it, if not every day, every other day. It depends on the days, obviously. Sometimes I do it in the morning. Sometimes I do it midday because we're blessed with really great weather here in SoCal. And sometimes I do it in the evening. But I'm right there on the bike on the beach.
That's excellent.
And in the theater, I think exercise is really important when we're working on shows. And this is something I've always done. I've always walked around and made sure that I wasn't sedimentary for too long, because we work in one of those environments where you're sitting in the theater seat for like 10 hours a day, and that's not healthy.
Yeah. Well, just to sort of respond to what you finished with there first, it's sort of like, I think that my experience during the pandemic has taught me to really take advantage of or to embrace the day off. We are blessed with being sent all over the world to crazy locations on someone else's dime to make art. And then we have a day off, and sometimes we'll sit in the hotel and watch TV. If
Right.
you're like doing an opera in Amsterdam, get outside and see Amsterdam.
Gorgeous, yeah.
Stuff like that. So I think I'm going to really double down on trying to take advantage of that. In terms of going back to nature, one of the things that we started doing in my family is, because we kind of felt like every day was the same, we tried to come up with outdoor activities to sort of mark the passage of time. And this was also during a period like when you're mentioning the bicycle, that we taught our younger son to ride a bike. And so that became part of our activities that we did. We went to the beach a lot more because we just were like, we got to get the heck out of here. And of course, we are very guilty of gardening our brains out as well, which I think is something that we're going to continue with, because it's really cool if, you can grow all your own food. And we're like, hey, let's try to see how much of the menu for the next holiday that we can actually grow ourselves. It's very cool. So we've done a lot of that, and, just a lot of, I probably have spent more time outside during the pandemic than I did pre-pandemic, just because I had to get the heck out. But now that we can be out and about, I'm like, I'll do this podcast recording outside. Why not?
Well, I mean, how many times have you been at tech and you've walked outside and gone, oh, the sun's still up?
Oh yeah, totally.
We live in this dark world. So for me, back last March, I said I'm going to do 10,000 steps a day.
Oh,
so
great.
I'm out there every day. Tonight I'll go for a walk about 8:30 when the temperature drops down to about 97 degrees. I will do my annual counting of the rabbits, bobcats, and coyotes. Last night we set a new record: 110 rabbits in our 4-mile walk, 1 bobcat, 0 coyotes though. So I don't know what was happening there. But I think just getting out in the sunshine, getting out in the fresh air. I tell my students, when you're on break, go outside for a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Don't sit in the theater. Just get up and just walk outside and just, breathe.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And come back in, kind of recharge.
Absolutely. That's what I do.
Totally.
I mean, it's a break. Don't go back and drink coffee with the crew. Nothing wrong with hanging out with the crew, but you're much better off just taking a walk. It's because it'll get your blood flowing.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of hoping that as we transition back to more traditional tech, I have this fantasy of creating like a stand-up tech table.
Yes, why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
We've junked our drafting tables. We've gone to the standing table or sitting table,
Right.
depending on how you adjust it.
Yeah. I mean, even just standing up is so much better for you than sitting down.
I must tell you, I stand up in tech about 80% of the time. I'm standing up because I get to see the stage better. I'm not slumped in or buried into this terrible chair that someone probably peed in last week, which happened to me once. I sat in a chair and it was wet.
Oh.
And I realized that they just had a matinee of a show. We're doing a turnaround and we were going into tech and somebody, relieved themselves.
When you're standing at your tech table, are you a headset comm or are you a phone receiver comm?
Well,
guy?
I usually have headset. I do love phones. I do love the phone, but I haven't seen a phone on a tech table for many, many years. But yeah, I do headset, and I have my monitors placed in a way that I can easily see them. But it also just gives me a clear shot to the stage. And yes, I sit down maybe 20 or 30% of the time, but I love standing up at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You are listening to Light Talk, and today's episode is sponsored by
A public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s. You know, there seems to be a good deal of noise out there about the value of the 10 out of 12. There are those who suggest we should abandon this time-honored rite of passage. The 10 out of 12, it follows an exhausting Friday night rehearsal, or as I like to call it, 10 out of 12 Eve, so beloved by theater artists that Anne Washburn even wrote a play about it and called it 10 out of 12. The 10 out of 12. The title refers to an equity mandate that says when actors are called in for 12 hours of tech rehearsal, they can only work 10 of those hours. But don't get me started about socialism and paycheck padding. Technicians actually have a heavier schedule, working 12 out of 14.
That's right.
And the beauty of that is both the lunch and dinner break can be reduced from 1 hour to 30 minutes if the producer provides some cold sandwiches and a few cans of soda. What could be fairer than that? While the workday is long, the intensity allows a great deal of progress to be made, and the bonding among the crew and the acting company is legendary. The 10 out of 12. A tech run in the morning in which everybody works really hard to get the show on its feet, full of surprises and problems, and then, after lunch, a full run with no stops so the director can get his show back. And that's when the fun begins. Missed sound cues, additions and subtractions of projection cues, missing props, but don't stop. We gotta get through the show. How red can the stage manager's face get? Will the director pop? And can the LD work fast enough over the run? Tech. How many times will the battle cry of "take a note" be shouted? So what if we restage? The crew can catch up tonight after break. So we can have at least one solid, clean run. After all, we did take a note earlier. Friends, without the 10 out of 12, the American theater as we know it will collapse. So I say, if the 10 out of 12 was good enough for Sophocles, damn it, it's good enough for me. Long live this dinosaur. This has been a public service announcement from No More 10 out of 12s.
Wow. Ooh. Wow.
I think I'm going to have nightmares tonight.
Wow. I mean, what a great public service announcement that was. I mean, so true. Everybody talks about, the actor's going to work 8 hours, with only one break. How about the damn crew? The crew's usually there a few hours before and sometimes after. So definitely after with notes. I mean, I've had note sessions after 10 out of 12s that lasted 2 hours. And it was like, please.
And that's my favorite scam, is the equity stage manager goes, hey, if we take a break right now before we start, we won't have to take a break. And okay, we're called to the stage, let's take a break. And then let's come back and work a really long time without a break.
But every time you take a break, it's always like, crew 10 minutes, musicians 15.
We're in the wrong union.
Yeah. No, and plus I can't really remember if any 10 out of 12 I've done had a nice smooth run where we made it to the end before dinner.
That never happens.
Yeah. And then you always say we'll finish it up after dinner and you don't.
No, there is no happy ending to a 10 out of 12.
No, there is not. And now, back to Light Talk.
Well, the sound of those rabid ducks means that once again it's time for Let's Talk About. So this week we're doing something new for Let's Talk About. We have talked so much about music and how it influences our design process. Zach and I are musicians and have lit many musicals and operas, and Steve has lit hundreds of musicals and dance shows. So let's just say that we're all three wild and crazy musical guys. And with so many jukebox musicals based on a specific artist's music, like the Jersey Boys, Moving Out, Boogie Nights, Mamma Mia, and of course, We Will Rock You, we want to know, what musical artists are we missing? Who have we left out of the Broadway spotlight? So today the topic is, what bands or solo artist's catalog do we think would make a great jukebox musical? Zach?
Well, I give this a lot of thought because Rock of Ages, which is a very beloved show of mine, is a jukebox musical. And so I think a lot about this and what would be a good jukebox musical. And I think there's some of the more obvious artists like Rupert Holmes type, the Escape the Pina Colada song, Answering Machine, Lunch Hour. All his songs are like almost mini plays within the song. And then you can spread out a little further to like the Michael McDonald era Doobie Brothers, where those are kind of like telling a story too. I guess it's really a lot of that yacht rock genre are these story songs. And I guess then you'd include like Toto. But I think sort of out of left field, one of the two bands, I guess, that I feel like there really could be a good story there. The first being Jethro Tull. I think their music is interesting. It kind of lends itself to a very theatrical presentation. So even though they're really like a band, a rock band, that you can sort of imagine it being performed by an orchestra in some parts. And another band that I really think that there's a great jukebox musical that hasn't been put together yet is the band Dire Straits.
Oh yeah,
their songs tell great stories. I think the music is beautiful, the lyrics are beautiful. I think there could be something there. Oh, absolutely. That Romeo and Juliet, Once Upon a Time in the West.
Unbelievable band. Steve, how about you?
Oh, well, you nailed me there, because Jethro Tull, certainly Aqualung and Passion Play both would be a great musical on stage. I think we're probably missing a lot of the blues artists out there. I think if you think about Muddy Waters or some of those guys.
B.B. King, I think great story there.
Yeah,
great story there.
Right. I think those stories can be told on stage, and be a very interesting evening.
There was a musical a few years ago I believe it was called Motown the Musical.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it. Did you see it? Has anyone seen that?
I did. Yes.
What and was it?
I mean, it was good. I mean, the thing that was kind of interesting and unique about that is that Berry Gordy was the producer and had like the final cut on it. So he came out as a glowing hero.
Of course, because it's about him, right?
Yes. But just like, it's also one of those things, especially for Motown, where you like sit back and you're just like, I cannot believe that all of these songs came out of that little house in Detroit, mostly played by the same 8 guys who were sight reading the music. The
Funk Brothers. There's a great documentary called Standing in the Shadows of Motown.
Absolutely, yes.
It's probably better than any musical. But, in the Motown vein, there is an artist I think would make for a great, great jukebox musical. And it's interesting because this artist was actually going to be writing an opera that I was going to be designing many, many years ago. And unfortunately, they couldn't come to terms with him. And that's Stevie Wonder.
Ooh,
and I think, and again, I'm like thinking, great, great, great artist, fantastic, diverse music, incredibly diverse music. Going from jazz to pure funk, like in Songs of the Key of Life, which, by the way, could be the name of this musical, right? Songs of the Key of Life. Absolutely. Or it could be Talking Book.
Or Intervisions.
Intervisions could be any Stevie Wonder album could be the title of this musical. But it should be a bio musical. Because his story is so interesting. Going all the way back to his family, to when he first stepped foot in that little basement studio, Hitsville, USA, in Motown, in Detroit. I mean, the stories that people have told about Stevie, going up to one of the greatest drummers in the world.
Benny Benjamin?
Yes. And Benny tells a story in the documentary about how Stevie sat at the drum set and started like playing patterns that he couldn't even replicate.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was like 12 at the time. It was like ridiculous. And also commercially, I love Jethro Tull. I think it'd be a great story, but I don't know how many people would come see Jethro Tull.
That's true. That's true.
You know, I'm putting my commercial hat on, not just
yes.
because,
well, you know,
because
it's
I would love to
interesting.
see I'd love to see a Yes musical too, right? But you know, I don't know if it's going to sell. You know,
What about Neil Diamond? Could we pull it off?
There
with
is a Neil Diamond musical coming. That's coming
there
next.
is?
That's coming in the next 2 years. It's already in the works.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny that you say about the Yes thing. I know that before Chris Squire died, there was actually talk of them doing some kind of like big tour with all like 74 members of Yes that would culminate in like a 1 month long stint on Broadway. But thinking about the commercial thing, there was like a legend in the 90s that I had heard from several different people, so you never really know if it's true, of like a meeting that took place in the back of a cab in like a ride from downtown to uptown to make Joe's Garage, the Frank Zappa album, into a musical. And that it never happened. But that's
Frank
another one
Zappa
where it's
musical.
Like, yeah.
That would be fantastic too.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some ideas. So what we need to do now is to start raising money.
Sure.
Because look, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to be a producer on Broadway, obviously. We have the connections. We'll get the people together, and we'll. But the problem is with Stevie is that he is very protective, which because the negotiations for this opera went on forever, and I think it was like a 2-year thing, and finally he said, this is like 1982 or something like that. It was really early. But he just decided he didn't want to do it. And, you know, Stevie is so big that he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
You know, the guy is
also,
a legend.
think about how exhausting that would be.
Yeah, he doesn't want to do a 10 out of 12.
I mean, there's, you know, he is in for a lot of work if he did that. I mean, a ton of work.
He wouldn't be at the 10 out of 12s. I don't think he'd be there. I don't think so.
I will say I do know a very famous author who wrote a play. And when they got their contract, they were like, we have to be there for like 2 weeks? What? No.
Yeah. All right. So Steve has our last question of the day.
Emma in Boston writes the most peculiar question. How do you deal with a limited number of runs? You know, I gave that a little bit of thought. And most of the time, the number of runs from an artistic point of view doesn't impact me. Sometimes, you know, I do something that I think really everything is working well. It's looking good. It's a great design, you know, scenery, lighting, costume. The acting company is great. Everything is really great about it, or everything's great about the ballet. And it bothers me that it's only 1 or 2 runs. So, you know, I want it to kind of have a life and grow a little bit. So I think mostly it doesn't impact me. You know, I take it for what it is, and I don't look at it with regret. What about you, David?
Yeah, it's rare I do a show where I'm getting residuals. It usually doesn't happen in the opera world. The only residuals I get is when they remount the show again.
Right.
And I either get another design fee because I'm going there to remount it, or I get a royalty. But yeah, it doesn't really matter to me. But Zach is our Broadway guy, so.
Well, the limited number of runs thing, I guess, if you look at it purely from like a contractual financial thing, there's always language about like, if you extend, then there's this that has to happen and that has to happen. And then if you decide to make it, convert it from a limited run to an open-ended run, how does that work? And there's always that language in your contract that says to be negotiated in good faith, which is like, what does that even mean? Yeah. But you know, with a lot of like smaller like projects, what I find often coupled with the idea of the limited run is that sometimes you're also in rep, and that is something you have to take into consideration. Like, am I making something that they'll be able to take apart and put back together when they're finished with their Hansel and Gretel, you know, stuff like that. Or when it's a limited run, you know, it's sort of like, how do I make this look like $1 million, even though when we know we can't generate $1 million because it's a limited run. So how do we take those things into consideration? But it's a lot of that. What are the other factors? Because rarely have I encountered something that was a limited run where that was the only limited thing about it. When I say limited, I don't mean limited in a bad way, because it's sort of like what you were talking about earlier with the light plots, where, you know, those challenges are sometimes fun. How do I make this look like that, even though I have a limited tool set, or I have limited time, or limited minutes, or limited cues? It's like a puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, it's limitations on everything.
Right.
Limitations on my sanity. The rocking sounds of the Luminoids. Hey, wait a second. We should have the Luminoids do the jukebox musical. We'll have the jukebox musical about the Luminoids.
Our humble beginnings.
Humble beginnings and a quick end. So the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again, you spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, livedesignonline.com, Amazon Prime Music, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, the law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Washington, D.C., and the Lone Star State.
And join us again next week, where we'll have some more crazy things to say about our totally insane industry.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye.
Adios.